try to make them profitable again. I think that actually I'm quite positive about the privatization process. We have a study of the European Agency for Reconstruction from 2008 looking at the effects of privatization when it really took off in 2005, where you could really see an increase in economic growth, in GDP growth, stemming only from the privatization process, when some big SOEs were privatized. Until then, it was mostly driven, the GDP growth, by foreign donations and by remittances. So, all in all, I'm not so pessimistic about the privatization process of socially owned enterprises. Thank you.
Okay, Besnik, and then I'll respond.
Well, I have no particular question. I would just want to make a response to Chris and Frank. I don't think that the question was whether there were alternatives to privatization. The point is this: privatization means political reflection of the values of the society, that those that live in the society should make the decision, not an international temporary authority here. And this was not done. The lack of the domestic involvement cannot be argued with the fact that, well, provisional institutions were still not in place, because there was no need for this hurry at the beginning, and by the way, there was no speed privatization at the beginning. The massive privatization happened after provisional institutions were set in place. Now to go back to Frank Janmat's response about the fact that strategic companies are not privatized. Who decided on the classification of companies to strategic or non-strategic? Again, this is a decision that should be made by domestic decision makers. Practically 100% of Kosovo decision makers say that Ferronickel is a strategic company, but yet the decision was made to privatize Ferronickel. And saying that, well, we left these companies aside, for me it's like having a thief enter my apartment and says, well, out of this 10,000 I will let you 1,000 because this is of strategic importance for you, you need to survive. So I cannot accept this argument. I also not accept the fact that EU tries to convince us that privatization was a success. If I implement a project and I evaluate it, of course, my conclusion would be that this process was a big success.
Okay, thank you all for these comments and questions. And I think that Besnik already did some of my job for me. And the thing, that's a very important point of the report, that first of all, that it shouldn't be the decision of unaccountable international bureaucrats what economic strategy a country should have to develop according to. It should not be their decision. That's a very important point of the report. And I think that the issue of alternatives, my main point in the report is that alternatives should be reviewed. It should have been a review. A review was not done. So to some extent today it is hard to decide. It's hard to exactly determine what would have been the alternatives, because such a review was never undertaken, and that was a problem. It was a preset choice to privatize, and no alternatives were considered. So I think that was a problem. So that is my main point in the report. At the same time, I do indicate some alternatives. One of the alternatives, which I think would be the most obvious, is simply to just help these companies get back on their feet after the war. Like, spend some of the money and resources and energy that was channeled into hiring international officials dealing with these legal problems, channeling some of these resources rather directly to the companies and help them get on their feet. I mean, that would be a very obvious choice, because that would be to wait, undertake a comprehensive review of the situation, to help these companies get back on their feet, which would also make them more valuable if the decision in the end would be to privatize them. So I think that would be the most obvious alternative at the time. And then, of course, you can have this discussion of whether the company should have stayed in public ownership in some way or not. Like in my country, Norway, most of our valuable companies, it's either state-owned or state has a majority share in the companies. So that is a discussion that should also take place. And another important point that I make is that this is a political decision. It's a political decision that should have involved local actors, it should have involved open debate, and it is not a decision that should have been taken by international officials. So I think that there are several reasons to question how this whole process was carried out. When it comes to Bill's question about how privatization in Kosovo compares with Eastern Europe, I haven't studied the cases in Eastern Europe in great detail, but I think there are several similarities. I think that the greatest dissimilarity is exactly this international involvement. It was not only, the process was not only undertaken under strong international influence, like it was in Eastern Europe, but it was actually formally led by international officials. So I think that is a big difference. And it didn't involve as much debate as from the cases I've studied it did in other cases. So that is, I think, the biggest difference. Whether neoliberal principles were at play, I mean, this is partly what I'm saying, really, because it was a political, privatization is a political issue, and it is something which, there's a discussion whether you should call it neoliberal or just economically liberal, or, it's a matter of definition, but I think that it clearly has many parallels also there to what you mentioned. So this is one of my points, actually. I think, Frikjamat, your point about this, like UNIC being in charge of not only privatization but the whole governance basically in Kosovo, yes, that's a very good point, and that is one of the reasons why I think that this report highlights this period of Kosovo's recent history and aspects of power and governance in Kosovo on several other fields than privatization, exactly because I think that it illustrates how the parts of the international governance operated in Kosovo and how it was carried out. And this about involving local decision making, I think Besnik replied to that, and I can just say yes, I agree completely. And also the 2008 study, I won't go into details, but Besnik indicated already one methodological problem with that report. I think there are also some others. And the issue of whether the SOEs were or could have been profitable after the war, I think that the report indicates that from the research that is available on this, it was clearly possible to make them economically profitable. Some of them were already functioning. One of the problems that I highlight in the report was that the companies, the SOEs, the companies that were classified as SOEs and were scheduled for privatization, in many cases they were asked by KTA to stop their operations before they were privatized. They were prevented to actually operate until they were privatized, which is the opposite of what should have been done. They should have been assisted in their operation, but instead they were halted. That is one thing. Another thing